something really interesting.
The whole housing market is propped up on these bad loans. They will fail.
The housing market is rock solid.
It's a time bomb.
In Washington, more Democrats are considering the option of impeaching President Trump.
The fact of the matter is, I think that when you look at this report, you can see that there's enough information to move forward with impeachment on this president.
What is the best thing for the country? It may be that we undertake an impeachment nonetheless.
If proven, some of this would be impeachable, yes.
All right.
Obstruction of justice, if proven, would be impeachable.
If we did not win, possibly, if there were not impeachment, what is going to happen is that the president is going to be emboldened.
Continuing to grow the economy, there are a number of places I think that Democrats should want to work with the president, and hopefully they'll start to see that what they're doing and continuing to attack the president is not a winning message. They should know that by now because they just keep losing and President Trump keeps winning.
Republicans say the Mueller report vindicates the president and proves there are no grounds for impeachment.
There was no collusion. It isn't there. Not a scintilla of evidence supports that. So it's time to move on.
President Trump agrees. He tweeted, "Only high crimes and misdemeanors can lead to impeachment. There were no crimes by me, no collusion, no obstruction, so you can't impeach. It was the Democrats that committed the crimes, not your Republican president."
You could reach in a bag and pull so many things out that are impeachable of this president. I support impeaching this president.
In which the president said that all this looking at him and eventually Democrats take control of the House and try to impeach him.
Share prices continued to tumble.
Lehman Brothers was forced to declare itself bankrupt.
The largest single point drop.
The regulators, they had the power to do every case that I made when I was state attorney general. They just didn't want to.
Watching this tsunami coming.
They were having massive private gains at public loss.
A financial engineer built dreams. When those dreams turn out to be nightmares, other people pay for it.
Impeach me and I'll sue you. That's essentially what President Trump is threatening. He tweeted today, "If the partisan Democrats ever tried to impeach, I would first head to the U.S. Supreme Court."
It was the greatest civilization in history. So advanced and powerful, it dwarfed anything that came before it. But like other great societies, it did not last. One day in the future, scientists may look back and investigate the colossal ruins, searching for answers to one haunting question. How could a civilization that mastered the planet suddenly collapse?
The Trump administration, big change in policy that's affecting oil markets, and not just Iran, but really the Trump administration's relationships with several friendly countries. This is the announcement. As of May 2nd, it will no longer grant any waivers from sanctions aimed at countries that continue to import Iranian oil. The State Department says it is aimed at completely cutting off Iran's crude exports until at least Tehran agrees to 12 demands aimed at curtailing its nuclear program and military activities.
This step directly affects 8 countries granted sanction waivers last November. 3, Italy, Greece, and Taiwan, have already reduced Iranian oil imports to practically zero. But 5 others, Japan, South Korea, and especially Turkey, India, and China, will have a tough choice to make.
The story of what on earth happened to us. If our worst fears are realized, our world could look like this. Great cities lie abandoned. Incredible feats of engineering left to ruin.
There's a real possibility that first world civilization as we know it is going to decline or collapse within the next several decades. It all depends upon the decisions that we make.
It may seem impossible, but many experts agree our modern industrialized civilization could fall apart.
A collapse today would be the greatest disaster in human history. The overall society would simplify. Probably many of us would go back to an agrarian way of life. We would lose everything to which we have become accustomed.
To understand how our civilization could collapse, imagine it already has.
In the last 2 years, we've embarked on an unprecedented economic revival. Unprecedented. America is now the hottest economy anywhere on the planet Earth. There's nobody close.
If the Democrats take back power, do you believe they will try to impeach you?
Well, you know, I guess it says something like high crimes and all. I don't know how you can impeach somebody who's done a great job. I'll tell you what, if I ever got impeached, I think the market would crash. I think everybody would be very poor, because without this thinking, you would see numbers that you wouldn't believe.
Excellent question. Yes, I am proud to be America's first female president. As you know, we've inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump. How bad is it, Secretary Van Houten?
We're broke.
The country is broke? How can that be?
Well, remember when the last administration decided to invest in our nation's children? Big mistake.
But President Trump is making it clear that he believes the Federal Reserve Board is holding the economy back from even stronger growth. William Brangham gets a look at the wider picture.
Job growth is averaging around 180,000 jobs a month for the first quarter of this year. That's a solid number by most measures, but it's also about 20% lower than a year ago. The president touted the economy's overall performance this morning, but even as he does that, he's also stepping up his public campaign against the Fed and its chairman, Jay Powell.
New data being released today shows President Trump's trade policies may be backfiring. Our Jane Wells is at the Port of Los Angeles with the details. Hi, Jane.
Hi, Sarah. If the point of tariffs was to help restore the balance of trade between China and the U.S., well, so far it's had the opposite effect. Imports have surged. Exports have plunged. Take a look at this. They're down 25% last year across the country, exports to China. It's even worse as of January. You can see the acute impact out west. The Institute of International Finance estimates U.S. companies are losing $40 billion in a year because of the Chinese tariffs.
Now, the U.S. and China could be closing in on a trade deal, according to President Trump and the Wall Street Journal. They're scheduling another round of talks and reportedly have their eyes on signing in May or June. Cha Sang-mi has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump held out hopes this week that trade talks with China will be a success, and the negotiations are moving along quite well. He added, quote, "You'll be hearing about it very, very shortly." This comes after a report by the Wall Street Journal saying the United States and China are scheduling 2 rounds of face-to-face talks in a bid to reach a deal to their protracted trade row by next month, according to people familiar with the plans. Under the tentative timeline, U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin will be traveling to Beijing the week of April 29th, followed by Chinese Vice Premier Liu He making a visit to Washington the week of May 6th.
The dollar is on the decline across the Pacific as China is leading the change for ASEAN to replace the dollar with the yuan.
We're fixing broken trade deals to protect the American workers, and we are standing up to China's chronic trading abuses and theft of intellectual properties and so many other things that they've done to us. I don't know how you people allowed this to happen for so many years. You've been here longer than me.
Are we headed to an actual full-blown trade war between the EU and the U.S.?
No. Ultimately, the EU has to retaliate with extra tariffs on
US goods the same amount of money. So we are in the middle then of a trade war which serves nobody, and we should settle this dispute by the instruments of the WTO and not by unilateral and arbitrary measures.
So if I understand correctly, you would argue if the US decides to implement about $11 billion on European products, the EU should do the same with American products, same size.
$11 billion on US products, because we cannot negotiate under pressure. It has to be on a level playing field and with the mechanisms that we have with WTO, and not with the Trump type of pressuring partners that is not going with the EU.
The president is tweeting right now. He just said this: Harley-Davidson has struggled with tariffs with the EU, currently paying 31%. They've had to move production overseas to try and offset some of the tariffs that they've been hit with, which will rise to 66% in June of 2021. He's tweeting at me because we just did the story. So unfair to the U.S., we will reciprocate. And the president has been very clear in terms of using tariffs as leverage to change the dynamic, not just in the trade situation, but change the dynamic with China as well. Has that been an issue in the earnings period so far?
Oh, no doubt. And you said to me the biggest risk coming into 2019 for tech was China. And now, when you look at what's happening on trade and some of the tea leaves, especially for FANG names, especially for Apple, you look at semi names, that's been an overhang now. It's started to get removed from those names, and that's why you're starting to see some of those stocks getting re-rated higher. Obviously, we need to see the details as these tariffs, as well as the trade details come out. But it comes down to IP protection. That's the key focus for investors.
We should be clear. The European tariffs on Harley-Davidson motorcycles were in retaliation to U.S. actions on steel and aluminum imports. So that was retaliatory. That wasn't a first move. That was a response. So again, maybe we call a truce on the tariffs, and that would help Harley-Davidson here and prevent them from moving production overseas.
Well, let's start with how it happened. You have to go back at least to 2008 and the crash of the American economy, the crash really of global capitalism. So frightened were the people who run the United States at that time, the big bankers in New York, the politicians at the Federal Reserve, and so on, that they rushed in to try to hold the economy from a complete collapse. And one of the things they did was drop interest rates to historically unprecedented lows. Not only all the way to zero, but on and off below zero, negative interest rates, which we hadn't seen hardly ever in our history. What this did made credit virtually free. And every corporation having any kind of difficulty over the last 10 years, and that's almost all of them, solved their problem by borrowing essentially free money. It was an opportunity none of them could forego. It was too delicious. It was a way to solve their problem that was easier, since the interest rates were next to nothing, than anything else they could have done. So they loaded up on debt. And now the problem is they're going to have a hard time in the years ahead making the kind of money they need to make to begin to pay off that debt, because especially now as interest rates are starting to go up, they're going to have a heavy load to solve in this way, and they're not prepared for it. So yeah, it has buried us in a corporate debt problem. We've never had this before at this scale, and if an economic downturn comes, as most economists expect over the next 12 to 24 months, nobody can guess what will happen when the companies that go down can't pay back the debts they've taken out, and how that will spread the misery across our economy. Very scary proposition.
Let me end with this number that I just found, and I think it's correct. I got it as I was researching this segment and this interview that I was about to do. It says that right now our banking or corporate cash to debt ratio in the United States as of the end of 2018 was at 12%. I'm not an economist or a financier, but that number troubles me as an American. Should it?
Absolutely. It tells you that if bad economic times come, And again, the majority of economists expect that over the next 12 to 14 months, an economic downturn. It tells you that for every dollar of debt that's going to come due, the cash that is held in the hands of the borrower is 12 cents, and that doesn't begin to cover it. So you could have a classic modern version of what we used to call a run on the banks, or a bank panic, or a monetary panic. And let's not forget, what led to the crisis of 2008 was the inability of people who couldn't afford it to pay back the mortgages they had taken out, and then the system fell apart based on that failure of the debt to be repayable.
Well, let us reveal their faces. Now, while President Trump often takes aim at the Fed's Jerome Powell and the central bank for the market's recent steep declines, Peter Schiff says actually both parties will be the ones to blame when the recession he says we're about to see makes the financial crisis of 2008 look like the roaring 20s by comparison. Schiff is here. He's the author of The Real Crash. Euro Pacific Capital CEO Peter Schiff joins us. But in the spirit of fair and balance, the man in charge of the trading group at TD Ameritrade, Executive Vice President Stephen Quirk, says October's volatility, and especially what we're seeing now, in no way signals the end of the world. All right, Peter, to you first. Why are you blaming both President Trump and Jay Powell of the Fed?
Well, I'm blaming both political parties. I think that the Republicans are going to take the blame because it's going to blow up on their watch. But if you want to name names, you got to go back to Alan Greenspan. You know, he's the one that really wrote this playbook. Every time we had a bear market while Greenspan was chairman of the Fed, he would quickly restart the party with cheap money. And so we set this process in motion. But it's not going to work anymore. We've done it too many times.
Why is President Trump to blame, and why is Jay Powell to blame?
No, they're going to get blamed because they're the fall guys.
I think that the administration's effort to bring extreme pressure on the Iranian regime is exactly right. After all, it's destabilizing the entire Middle East, or trying to. So I support it. It'll cause, of course, some bilateral tension with some of the countries, China, India, perhaps others, but it's the right move.
All right, President Trump also tweeting today about the Federal Reserve, saying if the Fed had done its job properly, which it has not, the stock market would have been up 5,000 to 10,000 additional points, and GDP would have been well over 4% instead of 3%, with almost no inflation. Quantitative tightening was a killer, should have done the exact opposite. So far, the president has floated two names for his pick for the Fed board, Herman Cain and Steve Moore.
You know, we're getting, we really turned bullish. When Trump got elected, we knew the gravy train was coming and tax cuts. And you can't argue with that. There's nothing better than tax cuts and repatriation. But again, it's a short-term thing. And we've said, look, this is the final blow-off rally. The question is, how long does it last? We've been warning our people that, look, there's a high chance that we're going to peak late this year, and now this is the first sign of that potentially. Or if we can keep to a 10 to 15% correction, we could have one more run up in the next year. But the odds are shifting very quickly to this could be it. Because we
okay, now hold on a second, Harry, because you throw out numbers here. I just want to make sure.
The bubbles are off the charts.
Okay.
And so this could be the beginning. Here's the trick, and it's very difficult. When bubbles burst, and we've researched every major stock bubble in the last century, the first whack is 40% on average in 2 to 3 months.
40%.
So the problem is it's almost better to hedge. We're telling right now options are cheap. It's better to hedge your portfolio than necessarily get out. But it's better to hedge or get out early, because once this thing happens, it'll happen so quick that people won't know it.
Crashes don't happen in one day. The market is going to go up for a while. I'm still optimistic about the U.S. stock market for a while, and Asian stock markets. It'll go up, and sometimes later this year or next, the decline will start in. But it doesn't happen in a day. And Stuart, when I said it's going to be the biggest market downturn in my lifetime, I mean, that's not so strange to me. 2008, we had a problem because of too much debt. Stuart, as you well know, the debt has skyrocketed since 2008. Yep. So when I say it's going to be worse than my lifetime, how could it not be?
So you're a debt bomb guy. You're saying, look, the crash is coming, the huge sell-off is coming, and it's because of debt.
Okay, here's how you explain it. Wall Street started bundling home loans together, mortgage-backed securities. and selling slices of those bundles to investors. And they were making big money. So they started pushing the lenders, saying, come on, we need more loans.
The lenders had already given loans to borrowers with good credit, so they go bottom feeding. They lower their criteria.
Before, you needed a credit score of 620 and a down payment of 20%. Now they'll settle for 500, no money down.
And the buyer, the regular guy on the street, assumes that the experts know what they're doing. He's saying to himself, if the bank's willing to loan me money, I must be able to afford it. So he reaches for the American dream. He buys that house.
The banks knew securities based on shitbag mortgages were risky.
You'll work on shitbag.
So to control their downside, the banks started buying a kind of insurance. If mortgages default, insurance company pays. Default swap. The banks insure their potential losses to move the risk off their books so they can invest more, make more money.
Well, a lot of companies insured this stuff. One was dumb enough to take on an almost unbelievable amount of risk.
AIG.
And you'll work on dumb.
And when they ask me why they did that?
Fees.
Hundreds of millions in fees.
AIG figured the housing market would just keep going up. But then the unexpected happens.
Housing prices go down.
Poor bastard who bought his dream house. The teaser rate on his mortgage runs out. His payments go up. He defaults.
Mortgage-backed securities tank. AIG has to pay off the swaps. All of them. All over the world. At the same time.
AIG can't pay. AIG goes under. Every bank they insure books massive losses on the same day. And then they all go under. It all comes down.
The hardest part was just kind of feeling like I was a failure. Why am I sleeping here with my kids in my car?
We've seen a great shift in the last few years as we came out of the recession, where it's not the job issue anymore, it's the housing crisis. People who've born, raised generations here that are finding themselves homeless. And it's just families getting pushed out. And it has nothing to do with income, jobs. It's just the doubling of rent.
But my wife works for a dental. My brother's the general manager for Shells. Even with that, we still find it hard to even get a place to live because we got jobs. So since we got income, we can't qualify for programs that consider us homeless. 2-bedroom apartments are like almost $1,900. Is that something that we can afford? No.
Without any changes, we don't see this problem getting any better in the near future.